We're told empathy is our superpower, but no one talks about how easily it becomes emotional labor or a trap.
Can empathy be weaponized? Can empathy be a bad thing? Yes, like any skill set on the planet. And what the data shows us is that the higher our empathy is, the higher our resilience is. So I think it's about mindset as well. Really knowing that what we're talking about is data, and who has the data wins.
Data is king. Women are praised for being empathetic until it costs us something. We're told empathy is our superpower, but no one talks about how easily it becomes emotional labor or a trap. Today, we're unpacking the truth behind empathy, the beauty of it, the burden of it, and the boundaries we need to protect ourselves from for drowning in it. My guest today is someone who has built her life's work around one of the most misunderstood and, frankly, most exploited skills that women possess: empathy. Mimi Nicklin is an internationally recognized empathy advocate, a best-selling author of Softening the Edge, and a global voice on what happens when leaders and cultures choose compassion over coercion. She spent years helping organizations, executives, and everyday humans reconnect to themselves and to each other. But today, we're taking empathy somewhere deeper, somewhere more personal, and maybe even a little bit provocative. Because if empathy is power, why are so many women exhausted by it? And what does empathy look like when it has boundaries? So welcome back to No One Told Me This. Let's get into it. Mimi, welcome to the pod.
Hello, thank you for having me.
It's so lovely to have you finally.
I know, we were patient, weren't we?
We were patient. We've waited a long time. You're probably the longest that I've waited for a guest, actually.
There you go.
No pressure.
I was going to say, now the benchmark is really high.
No pressure at all. But it's lovely to have you here finally. And I would love just to start with you introducing yourself. I know I've given an intro on you, but it's always nice to hear how people define themselves. So I would love to know, who is Mimi behind the LinkedIn bio and all of that?
Do you know, Jess, people ask me that all the time, but honestly, there isn't much behind what you see for a couple of reasons. Number one, I think if you're going to stand for empathy, you have to be pretty authentic. So what you see is pretty much what you get. There's not a lot more, right? I think people always want me to have like some really exciting backstory to my life, but behind this work is just like me, my daughter, and my bulldogs, going for a walk on a Sunday. So yes, I do have a little girl. She's 8, and I have 2 bulldogs. And really, when I'm not traveling the world to talk to people like you about empathy, that's what I'm doing. I lead a very quiet life when I'm not kind of in front of the camera.
Yeah.
But as I said, really what you see is what you get. I for me, this is not work. It's just who I am. I believe that I was born to do this. So really,
I love that.
This is, I don't know, it sounds so cheesy, but my purpose work, it's just, this is what I do. This is who I am, all jumbled together.
I don't think it's cheesy at all, but I also think that we all take this journey on figuring out what our purpose is. And I love to hear when people feel deeply connected to the work that they do, because I think that impacts the quality of what you do.
It does. And isn't there a lot of pressure to find it, So
yeah, from a young age.
Yes, right. Everyone's looking for their purpose. So I do feel really grateful that I'm living in it. But I also think, and perhaps we'll talk about it today a little bit when it comes to women and work and life, is that there's so much pressure for us to find it, right? But not everybody has an it, and not everybody needs, you don't have to be one thing. There can be many different parts of purpose, I think, throughout your life. So maybe it's an evolving journey as well.
Yeah, definitely. I'm really interested to know how you got into the work of empathy, because actually you're the only person I've ever heard of that just works in empathy. Do you know what I mean? It's quite a new thing. So
it's quite a niche.
How did this happen? And what was the transition into, I'm going to make this my life's work?
Oh, I definitely didn't ever make that decision. People always think you laid this out and it was a plan, and it totally wasn't. But the story did begin here in Dubai, which is why I'm always so excited to come back. So thank you for giving me another reason to do that. But yes, when I first came here in 2018, it was a very different city than it is today. Yeah. But at that time, I took over a business that was if I'm going to be polite and very politically correct, not quite what I expected when I took over that business. And it's safe to say I was pretty overwhelmed at the time. I didn't feel like I had the skill sets to do that role. And I found a coach during that period. And she was asking me about my leadership style. And I remember at the time talking a lot about intuition, being a very intuitive leader. I had been in corporate for maybe 12 years by then. I had been in this region for a long time. Most of my career has been in Asia Pacific. And she stopped me and she asked me a question which in the end changed my life. Because she said, Mimi, is it intuition or is it empathy? But at the time, I had never given any thought to empathy. I don't think even as a word, let alone as a life's purpose. And nor did I decide to make it so, Jess. It wasn't like I thought this is suddenly going to be something that I dedicate my life to. But as I started to research what she had seen in me, it became me really over time. I started to write my first book. I've just finished my fourth.
Oh, amazing.
And
congratulations.
Thank you. Yes, you do have to write them in the middle of the night somewhere between everything else. And that work became me really. It's like maybe I was called to it, but it's a long journey. And I think one of the things to really note about that is that it looks very easy on the front. You know, when you look kind of at social media and people sort of think, almost like you just said, but you know, now you are empathy, you live, well, I had to create it, you know, because just like you're saying, you'd never really heard of it. Most people haven't, although that's changing. So I had to create this space and I created it from belief. I always believed that the world needed more than this. But the world didn't necessarily believe that for the first 5 years. So I wouldn't say it's been necessarily easy to create this purpose and live it. But gosh, do I love it.
Yeah, I can imagine.
So yeah, it's been a long journey actually.
Life-changing stuff. I'm sure that you see people being transformed every time you run your sessions and do work with them. So yeah, I can imagine how fulfilling it is, to be honest.
It is.
I want to talk a bit about the conditioning of us as women. Because I've kind of been going through maybe even a slight unraveling this year with all the different things I've been conditioned to do as a woman.
Interesting.
And I think it's interesting when we think about empathy because we're expected to be empathetic. And I think that there is a lot of conditioning in us to take people as they are, not ask for too much, not necessarily speak up if our boundaries are being crossed, understand where they may be coming from and why they maybe acted that way, and therefore censor ourselves a little bit with what what our truth is and all of that. And I'm really interested to know, why do you think that women are conditioned like that way in order to empathize, especially when it ends up costing them something?
Gosh, Jess, there's so many parts of that answer. Let me start at the end in terms of, does it cost somebody something, anybody, anything?
Yeah.
Because I think part of the challenge in that question and in, like you said, in this conditioning is that people don't really know what empathy is. And often, even perhaps in your question, what we're actually referring to might be sympathy, might be pity, might be compassion, might be kindness, right? There's many pieces in that. And I think that often women, because we so frequently carry the caregiver role, it can become very blurry in terms of what it is that we're doing. Now, empathy itself is a skill set, actually. It sits in the prefrontal cortex of your brain. It is the skill of being able to understand the reality or the perspective of another. That does not mean in any part of that you must censor yourself or be less of yourself or carry less of yourself. It is simply about perspective taking. It's about, do I understand your reality? There's nothing in there that says I must agree with it. In fact, empathy is judgmentless and agreementless. So you can understand somebody's reality and vehemently disagree or even hate it, right? I can hate what you're saying, but understand it. So I think part of the challenge in your question is that people don't really know what it is. And if that's the case, then perhaps we're conditioning people to use a skill set that they think is an emotion or an action. So then it's going to become even more heavy for people to carry. The reality is to empathize with others is simply to understand them.
Yeah.
Right? But I think potentially, and you'll have to correct me, but what you're talking about and where the line becomes blurry is when you're asking women or men, but in this case women, to carry the weight of another or to shift yourselves because of their reality, right? Which are actions and decisions that might come on the back of empathy.
Yeah, and maybe that's why I've kind of grouped it together, because I think about everyday examples and I think quite often, you know, there's things that people talk about, like women are so much more forgiving, let's say, than men. And that's such a huge generalization, but it's something that we probably all heard. Almost like this capacity that we have to absorb people's humanity. And we don't necessarily always get that same experience. And again, I'm using generalizations, but hopefully we can all agree that we've heard these kind of themes, you know, throughout our lives. And I'm wondering whether you have ever seen empathy sort of being used against women in order to get them to be compliant, in order to get them to be agreeable, whether it's in relationships, whether it's in the workspace. I'm wondering whether you ever had any experience of that. And again, maybe I'm using empathy in the wrong way.
No, and you know what? Even if you were, it wouldn't matter, because the conversation still holds value. Because even if you were using it in the wrong context, millions of other women are too, right? So it doesn't actually take away from the value of the conversation. I think the opposite of being very empathetic is to be very narcissistic. So when you talk about relationships, are there occasions when women are being manipulated through the use of empathy? Well, yes, if they happen to be married or dating a narcissist, because that's what narcissists are able to do. So yes, I think it's not necessarily the empathy itself, but it's the behavior in the relationship that it's being put within. Can empathy be weaponized? Can empathy be a bad thing? Yes, like any skill set on the planet, right? Because in the end, it is the person who chooses to use that skill that we're reflecting upon. So let me turn momentarily to politics. At the moment, because of the way of the world order, often in my audiences, people will say to me, but Mimi, does President Trump have empathy? And the reality is, the answer is yes. He has very high empathy. He understands people. Do we like what he does with it, right? It's not for this podcast, nor would I probably talk about it on any podcast. But that is up to us and our own opinions and where you sit and what you believe in politics and all of these different things are your personal choices, right? But can leaders who you perceive to be behaving, like you were saying, to be manipulating or to be putting women into awkward positions or a place that they don't want to be, there's a lot of complexities to that, because is it the empathy that's being pushed to create that behavior? I don't think so. I think it's the leadership. So we have an empathy deficit for sure in our world, but we also have a leadership deficit, right? So if those leaders don't know how to use these skills, it's quite easy to use them incorrectly.
I kind of want to even go a little bit deeper, because when you're talking, I'm thinking how much of that is us feeling like there's an expectation and then not wanting to fall short of that, you know? So almost like we would have to be the villain in someone's story in order to not be compliant and not, if we're not agreeable, we're not compliant, we are automatically the villain. And for a lot of people, not just women, they don't want to be the villain in someone's story.
I don't want to be the villain. Do you?
Right. I never want to be the villain. And then there are times in life where you have to accept that you're probably going to be the villain in this person's story, but you know you're doing what's right for you. But yeah, I say that because when you're saying that, I'm like, yes, when it comes to other people weaponizing or using it. And then I'm also wondering what part do we play in that exchange as well? And how much do we put pressure on ourselves to be overly empathetic just so that we are agreeable? We're not seen as difficult. We're not seen as rocking the boat or being disruptive.
Look, again, I think there's a lot of parts of that, because I think if you're talking about kind of being compliant or being walked all over, as it were, those have, again, nothing really to do with empathy itself, but to do with how you show up and the decisions that you show up as a leader in the workplace. And obviously, as a woman, as a female leader in my career, I can only reflect on, my own experience. But you have those choices to make all the time. When I reflect back on the work that I've done and the way that people that have worked with me would explain things to me, and in fact, this happened to me just last week, somebody who worked with me for quite a long time. She said to me, Mimi, one of the things I loved about you is that you never fall into conflict. And I was like, I literally have no idea what you're talking about. But what she meant was when there was a conflict, she admired at the time the way I was able to navigate through that. Now, was I being compliant? Absolutely not. But was I shouting and screaming in a power suit? No. Right? I very much believe in grace.
Yeah.
Right? In being gracefully able to advocate for yourself. So again, I think those are decisions about how you show up. I was definitely not being walked all over, but I was definitely not the villain either. So I think there are shades of grey in that decision making. Empathy itself, often people talk about it as a soft skill, but it's not soft. It's really hard. So the ability to use it, it's hard to find, it's hard to master, it's hard to maintain, but it also has a very hard impact on the business world. So you can use it to manipulate, impact the behavior of others if you want to in the workplace. So if leaders are going to do that, that's their choice. It comes back to ethics, right? It comes back to behavior, it comes back to ethics, it comes back to values. Because of course, if I understand you really well, can I manipulate you? Probably. I can manipulate you better than if I didn't understand. But I would never choose to do that. And I choose to believe, Jess, that most people don't. But of course there are outliers, and of course there are people that might use those skills, in ways that are less favourable than others, shall we say.
Use your powers for good or for evil.
Yes, two sides, right?
I'm interested then in how women particularly can tell the difference. So because there's a grey area and because people may not be using empathy the way that they should, how can women tell the difference between what is empathy and when it's just become self-abandonment now?
Look, empathy is just the ability to put yourself in the shoes of the other. So you don't have to leave yourself or your own values or your own decisions. As I said earlier, I could very easily, if we were having a conversation, I could very easily say, Jess, listen, I really understand that your opinion on the situation is that I have done something wrong and that you're very uncomfortable with my behavior in the workplace because of this situation. And you could say, yes, Mimi, I am. I'm incredibly upset with how you've been behaving. At that point, again, I have a choice whether I say, I'm really sorry, Jess, and I what did you say earlier? Submit myself, right? And say, no, but Jess, you're right. And I'm sorry, I was wrong, and step away and fall into the shadow of that conversation. Or in empathy for you, now I have understood your opinion and your perspective, I can say, I really respect that. And I actually am very sorry that you experienced it like this. But let me explain to you why I did that and why I believe I was or I am in the right, or at least the resolution and backup for my behavior. So that's why I say earlier, the ability to use empathy, actually, you see it in places like the FBI, you see it in the police forces, you see it in armies around the world. These are skills that enable you actually to stand up for yourself. Right? They give you data. This is human data. And the more data I have about my leaders or the people I'm working with or people in your family, your mother-in-law, right? Difficult relationships in families. The more I understand you and your context and your reality, actually, the more able I am to advocate for how I want to show up and what my opinions are in these situations. And of course, sometimes in my experience, that does mean you have to be more submissive just to keep the peace. Right? We're coming up to Christmas as we record this. For anyone who celebrates the Christmas season will know that within families, there are always tensions in big festivities like this, right? You're always going to have a choice whether you lean into that conflict or whether you make the choice to step away. In stepping away, am I being submissive? Possibly. But I'm also making the decision for the greater good, say, of the dining table, that's okay with me right now. So I think that submissiveness or that choice to step away can also change depending on the scenario.
I can see how that can be the case. And I see your Christmas analogy as well. I'm wondering then how you feel like empathy can coexist really well with assertiveness for women without them being labeled as cold or difficult, because a lot of women have this experience. The moment they do speak up for themselves and don't just go along with the flow, or to be one of the, in the in crowd, or to be one in the boys club, or whatever it may be, depending on their environment, they are quite often given labels of, being difficult and this, that, and the other. And that might just be them doing what you're saying and being clear and just speaking their experience rather than just accepting and then being submissive. Because also, when from a leadership perspective, some people think, if I'm the leader and you're not, then you just need to take what I'm saying.
Yes.
Do you see what I mean? And there is that like power dynamic at play.
But there's a difference, isn't there, between autocracy and leadership or influence. Like I guess, Jess, I'm quite biased because for me, I've always been using this skill to create influence. And I believe and hope that that influence is a good influence. But it's interesting you asked me this question tonight, because last week I was in Sarawak, which is eastern Malaysia. So it's not the mainland of Malaysia. Malaysia's in two parts. So I had flown to eastern Malaysia and I had run a workshop for an oil and gas company, which was predominantly men. There was 100 people in the room, mainly men. And at the end, this lady asked a question. She put her hand up and she said, "Mimi, I want to ask you how it is that you use your soft power." And I was like, oh, that's an interesting question. She said, because you've had us listen to your every word. And she said, I can say on behalf of my colleagues in the room, we've enjoyed this session, we've learned, we're with you. And she said, but I've never met a woman like you before, because you've not shouted, you're not aggressive, you're not dressed in a masculine way. How do you do that? And I was, to be honest, Jess, I was quite taken aback. No one's ever asked me that. Certainly not in a room full of men. Yeah. So it was like a personal moment in a crowd between me and this woman looking at each other. But I think that the reality is that if you want to be able to influence others and lead others in a positive way, you have to first understand them. Because how can I motivate you if you join my team, let's pretend, right? How can I create a motivating work environment for you if I don't understand you? If I don't know what your drivers are? I don't need to be mean or tough or icy to get you to turn up and perform, right? Because it's probably not going to work anyway, right? So I think the thing is, and I ask my audiences this often, we don't want to parent our children the exact same way that our parents parented us, right? Because times have changed. So why are female leaders trying to lead the same way that their female leaders led them? It doesn't make sense, right? That the day of the power suit and the masculine female leadership team has gone. So again, I think it comes back to choices. I feel probably for many women, they think, and perhaps they're right, that they're more likely to get ahead if they reflect the behavior of the men around them. But in my experience, that has never been the case. I will never shift to join the crowd in that way. And it has never held me back yet. So I'm sure it will one day. But so far, I have managed to use that for influence, because the core to all influence is empathy. So I think it's about mindset as well. Really knowing that what we're talking about is data, and the who has the data wins.
Data is king.
Exactly.
Well, you often say that empathy isn't passive. It's a powerful choice that people can make. I wonder how women can use empathy as influence. If you have any practical tips on how they can actually do that. Use it as influence and not as obligation.
Nice sentence. So empathy, all of empathy comes back to human connection, right? It comes back to being able to understand each other. And the core to all empathy is listening. And actually, generally, not always, but generally, women are quite good listeners. We have this perception that women have more empathy and are better listeners than men. But according to research and even genetic testing, there is no data that shows that there's a difference actually between genders. Interesting, right?
Yeah.
So men and women are equally capable of empathizing, of listening, of understanding. What they do believe, although they can't prove, is that we are better listeners and potentially better at naturally showing empathy because of generational learnings. So our grandmothers taught our grandmothers taught our grandmothers. And we grew up in multi-generational environments and communities, right, in the last 200 years. So as women who tended to stay home while our hunter-gatherer husbands went out and fed us all, right, we were in a home of some form, whether that was a house or many hundreds of thousands of years before a cave, when we were living in, the cave men and women eras. We had to communicate to many different people at once. So the children, the grandparents, the men when they came back from hunting. Women have always had to understand many, many opinions and needs at once. And so there is a belief that there is very much generational learning that is embedded into us. So when it comes to practical tips, I think a lot of it is about going back to that wisdom that is within us, not just as women, as humans, right? If we talk about being cavemen and women, when we were living in tribes on the plains, we knew that if somebody left the tribe, it was a risk. Either they died or we did, depending on who was hunting and who was gathering, who held the power. But to separate out the tribe was always a danger, and we knew that. And yet today, Jess, we're living in the most disconnected and isolated times in all history. 52% of us are lonely every year. 900,000 people die of loneliness. So we are more disconnected than ever before. So when it comes to women using these skills to have influence, to create impact, start there. Start by seeing each other. Start by listening, not hearing, right? Hearing is different from listening. Hearing is I heard you speak. Listening is I decoded your reality or your information, what you meant. And probably that starts with our children, right? And if you don't have children, it starts with the children around you or the younger generations around you, because we are role modeling to create the change that the world needs to see, which is a more connected society.
Yeah.
So listening is the core to that. And I mean, if you want, we can go through some of those tips, but fundamentally, that's where you should begin, is looking at, am I listening to understand you, or am I listening to reply?
Yeah. Which I think we sometimes do without even thinking or knowing that we're doing it. As someone's talking, we're like, I've got something good to say back to this. I'm not going to let this go. I need to remember that point so I can come back and win this argument.
Yeah.
But no, you're absolutely right. And as you were talking, I was thinking, how amazing would the world be if there was more humanity? I think is the easiest way to put it, right?
Yes.
Seeing the person in front of us. I want to touch on self-empathy because this is a super interesting topic, especially like how we show up for ourselves, with ourselves, and then how that kind of changes the way that we show up for people at work, people in our families. So I wonder if you could define for us like the self-empathy and then how that flows out of us, basically.
Yes. So self-empathy is the ability to understand ourselves. So the ability to know what you need or want to thrive, to grow, to succeed in life. We often think that's very indulgent, but it's not indulgent, it's a necessity because for many reasons. But the very simple reason is if I don't understand my own needs and my own biases, my own judgments, how am I ever going to understand yours? Right? Because it becomes very blurry, especially when you layer in high stress and low time, which is how we all live all the time, right? Running, loads of stress.
Yeah.
If I don't know what my opinions are and my needs and my bias, then it's very simple for me to run around the whole time placing mine on others. And I think the enemy for all success is assumption. And so self-empathy helps you move out of a position of assumption into a place of knowledge when it comes to you and therefore how your relationships are built around you. So I'll tell you a little story. When I was living in Dubai, my daughter was 2 years old. And I remember picking her up from school one day. Well, kindergarten, right? And I went and I picked her up and the teacher said to me, "Mummy, can I talk to you? And you know, Jess, you're like, oh God,
What did they do?
What's she done? Right? She's only 2. What could she have done? And the teacher told me that during the day, my little girl, her name is Umi had been crying. And the teacher had gone to this little girl, she's 2, she's tiny, and said, Umi, why are you sad? And this little girl looked up and said, I am not sad, I'm frustrated. And this teacher was like, you're 2.
Yeah.
Right. How do you know? And, so she said to me, what I want to ask you is, how does she know that? Because I've been a teacher for a long time and I've never met a 2-year-old that can define the difference between their emotions. But Jess, the honest truth is most adults can't define between their emotions. Right? That is the easiest way for me to explain what self-empathy is, right? The ability to know the difference, the ability to know how you're showing up and turning up, and therefore how you're building those relationships with others. I define 2 types of self-empathy. One is internal and one is external. So we talk about inward self-empathy and we talk about outward self-empathy. Fundamentally, to be inwardly self-empathetic is just to understand what I need. So maybe after this meeting show with you today, I need a really good dinner and a sleep because I just got off a plane, right? Like a few minutes ago. But outward self-empathy is me to understand what I need from others. So that might be that my husband is late very often and that it's creating huge tension in my life. And then I just need to have a conversation with him and say, listen, your lateness is creating massive anxiety for me. How can we overcome that? Right? And then use my empathy to understand his side of that conversation, right? But if I don't recognize that I'm suffering with that anxiety, how can I ever solve for it, right? So you'll hear in the media a lot about self-awareness, but there's no point, according to me, of having self-awareness if you have no self-empathy. Because to know you have something, but not to understand it, is to be stagnant. I know I'm anxious. If I don't know why, I can't solve for it.
It's interesting. I was about to say to you, because self-awareness is such a buzzword right now, how would you explain the difference between them? But you've said like a knowing and an understanding.
Yes.
Is the difference between it, which is a really helpful definition, because when you were talking and explaining it, I was thinking this is what everyone just says is self-awareness.
Yeah.
Knowing yourself, knowing what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are, what you want, all of those kind of things. But this is a level deeper.
It's deeper. It's actually got insight in it. So again, I'll give you another story to help bring it to life. A few months ago, and I travel for my work all the time, and this work as fundamentally a keynote speaker is a very lonely job, right? I thought this earlier when I got to Dubai. I was like, this is such a weird life that I lead, right? I just like run around the world all on my own most of the time and turn up to hotels on my own and find podcast studios on my own. It's such a strange life. But I love it. And a few months ago, I was heading to India, which I love. I adore working in India. But on this particular occasion, I was very anxious for days before. And I was aware. Did I have self-awareness of the anxiety? Yes, but I was ignoring it. I was getting on with life. I had things to do. Until one morning I woke up and thought, okay, enough. It's annoying me, quite frankly. I have to work out what's wrong. What am I so anxious about? I've been to India hundreds of times. I'm really looking forward to this work. It's a great event I'm going to speak at. So I took myself off and ordered a latte and sat where I like to sit in Kuala Lumpur, where I live. And people watched and spent some time just with myself, trying to reflect on what the problem is, shifting from the awareness to empathy, to insight. And what I realized, Jess, when I just slowed down enough to be present with myself, was that actually what I was really worried about was the airport transfer. Because I had had an experience the time before where I had arrived at Mumbai very late and the pickup wasn't there and I didn't have cell service, and it was a very anxious time. It's the middle of the night. I can't get anywhere. I have no driver. I can't speak the language. I have no phone. Story of my life. But clearly that had been more worrying to me than perhaps I had thought of. At the time, you get on with it, find a way to a hotel and carry on. But a few months later, I was sitting in that. And so then I made the decision, which I stick to this day, which is that I now won't take a job if they don't give me a proper airport transfer in a branded car. It's very important to me that if I'm staying at the Hilton, this car says Hilton. Because the challenge with Uber and Careem and Grab and all of these apps is you are literally getting in the car with totally strange men.
Yeah.
Like everything our mothers told us to never do, we now do like every day.
Multiple times a day.
So anyway, the point of the story is that it was only when I slowed down enough to find that presence, to move from awareness of why I'm uncomfortable to actually understanding it, that one email, problem solved. I wrote to them. I said, please, can you make sure I have a really well-organized pickup? I want to know the car number and his name and all of these things. Anxiety gone.
Done.
So it takes time. It takes practice.
I wonder if you were just thinking and asking yourself the questions, or whether you were like journaling, or whether there's a particular route that works for you.
So I find that talking is very helpful.
Okay.
I actually have an app that I recommend to many people called Letterly.
Okay.
I use it for lots of my work as well, for writing emails and that type of thing. But it's fundamentally a voice recording app.
Okay.
That allows you to reflect back on yourself. But for many of my clients and the people I work with, journaling or some form of writing is really, really powerful. So last year we created actually a self-empathy journal, which does exactly that. It gives you a structure so that you can write, reflect, hear yourself back. Because you know what's interesting about the mind is that we can only hear one voice at a time. So while I'm talking right now, I would have to stop talking to be able to hear your voice, to actually be able to understand it.
Yeah.
So when we're running through the day thinking about a million things, it's very hard to channel out to the thoughts that are actually ours amongst all the noise. So yes, I really recommend journaling. I don't do it personally because I am a writer, so I write enough. But as I said, I will speak through the app, and that will convert it into words as well.
Oh, interesting. Letterly. I'm going to check that out.
Have a look.
In your experience, when a woman kind of develops that self-empathy, what do you feel changes first? Do you feel like it's her language, or her decisions, or her relationships?
I think it's none of them, Jess. I think it's confidence.
Nice.
Yeah, I think it's confidence. And the reason I say that is because women, most of my work is in Asia and the Gulf, in markets where we have more traditional, conservative structures when it comes to gender and families and relationships overall. Okay? So it's not the law, right? But generally in the countries I work in, countries like India, Sri Lanka, Malaysia, Indonesia, Bahrain, Oman, there's more traditional structures in place than there are in some of the Western markets around the world. So when I'm working with women in those markets, I think very often they have never been given the opportunity to reflect on these things ever. Because women, as we know, never stop, right? And they're always looking after a million different people that aren't themselves, whether it's the kids or the grandparents or the in-laws or the husbands or the people they work with or the people they work for. Everybody, right? Women are always looking after everybody other than themselves.
Yeah.
So when I do this work with women, I think the first thing that really changes is confidence that they are worthy of that conversation with themselves, and it's amazing to me. Sometimes I'm thinking about two women recently, but I'll have some women in a workshop who might be slightly older, slightly more traditional, and they're quite hard for me to break into the conversation, right? They're very shy, quite timid. They might not say much for the majority of, say, a 3-hour masterclass. And then at the end, when I get them to speak up and say, how was your morning? What did you take away? They will tell me the most transformational sentences of the whole room because they have just been internalizing that whole process. So probably to your point, does that come out in language? Yes. Does it come out in body language? It does. And how they sit. Women will go from really sitting very shyly to opening up by the end of the workshop and smiling.
Yeah, that's
and making
amazing.
eye contact, right? So body language, yes, language, confidence, behavior. I think commitment to their worth. You know, people say all the time to me, nobody ever asked me to think about myself before. Maybe we need permission. You know, we feel we do. I'm not saying we do, but I feel for many women, we feel that we need permission to focus on ourselves because we feel that our first responsibility is to everybody else.
Yeah. And I think on a personal level, when you say that, I think sometimes we do feel like we need permission because we get pushback when we have the audacity to think we don't need permission. We kind of get told, like, who does that? That's not what women do. Like, what do you mean you want to do this? You're a mom, or you're a wife, or you're whatever it may be. We can get that pushback. It's more societal norms and expectations than anything else. But I find that society has it, and then we also have it amongst ourselves. So sometimes a lot of women experience judgment from other women who live life in a different way and believe that way is the best way. And, you know, there's so many different conflicting ideals that everyone lives.
And I think women are often our worst critics.
Yeah.
As in women to other women. Right?
In my experience.
So much judgment, right?
In my experience.
So much judgment. And often, because I work cross-culturally a lot, and I work with religions and cultures that are not my own. Sometimes when I ask those women, why are you doing this with me specifically? They will literally tell me, because in my own community, there's too much judgment.
Yeah.
Right? I can't have these conversations with the women that actually know me or know my religion or know my culture because the judgment is too high. So, yeah, I think unfortunately we have all these conversations about women supporting women, but I think often we are our own worst enemies.
Yeah, I've definitely experienced that. And I think what's interesting is that even when we think about in the workplace, I've had different experiences of some women feeling like there isn't enough room for all of us, right? Because especially if there's male-dominated teams and there are just a few women, like you said, even in the room, the majority men, few women, then sometimes it is more like, okay, if there's already women there, they can feel like if they help you and support you, they might be pushed out because there's not enough room for all of us. And I definitely have had those experiences where women feel like it's you or me, and I'm so sorry, but I have to choose me. You know what I mean? Not even because they're bad people, but just because they feel like they've worked so hard to be there and they can't give that up for the sake of someone else. And I do feel like we see these dynamics at play, and it depends whether you're in corporate, whether you're, you know, in a startup, whether you're, you know, different, I guess different fields will have a different experience. But I think within us as women and that self-judgment, sometimes it's not even from a negative place. Sometimes it's from a place of survival. And, you know, I need to make it. I need to make this work.
I've come so far, right? In fact, I spoke to 2 young Saudi women recently, and they were saying that, Mimi, we really want to be like you in that we want to lead with empathy. We want to understand people. We want to create environments where people want to stay and cultures where our Gen Zs want to work for us. But their bosses, who are women, had to fight so hard to get to the position they were in that they will give them no room at all to do it differently, right? So again, it's not that these women that are their bosses are bad women. It's just that the only way they knew to win at the time was to fight. Yeah. Right? So now when these younger women are coming through and saying, but can't we do it differently? They're like, no, it doesn't work. Right? No time for that. Do it this way. It works. You know, fight or be fought.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think you're right. There's, but I also think it's worth saying that it's not only about gender, in that I think the market is so competitive. It doesn't matter whether you're in real estate, whether you're in FMCG, whether you're in hospitality, it doesn't matter. The pressure on the world and on our economies is so high, and people are living in such fear, and it's subconscious. They don't know it most of the time. That my feeling is that the competitive nature out there is, I don't know, tougher than ever. And everybody goes around in like a social media bubble, smiling and pretending to support each other and celebrate each other's wins. But I feel that under the surface, everyone is competing, and that if someone's going to win, it's going to be me.
Yeah.
That mindset is rife, particularly in cities like Dubai, where there is so much competition.
Yeah, 100%.
Right? Where there's so much going on. So I do think it's a societal reality, not just in women, that the pressure for us to succeed is so high. The stakes are so high. And we feel so at risk so often because of political, social, economic instability that people are quite cutthroat out there.
Yeah.
This kind of mindset of abundance doesn't exist that often. You know, people say to me, Mimi, why are you giving away your slides? I'm like, well, what are they going to do with them? I mean, they're going to read them, right? If they want to replicate them and present them, be my guest, right? Because I don't believe you can present them like I presented them this morning anyway. So take them. What am I hiding them for? So, yeah, I think there's probably a mindset shift across genders, which is also rippling down.
I wonder how you think we can help with that practically, because in this dog eat dog kind of market where it's so competitive, how do we use empathy as just a really powerful tool and actually impact cultures with it, instead of it being seen, as you said, as a soft skill and as, you know, almost like a vulnerability, almost, where, you know, there's no time to be vulnerable. I've got to win. I've got to, you know, advance my career. I've got to be the one to get the promotion. I've got to, you know what I mean? Like these kind of day-to-day things that we all have. How can we help our cultures within the workplace to see empathy more as a necessity, maybe?
I think it starts just with education, which is why I'm so grateful to have conversations like this, right? Because hopefully some of the people that are listening to us today, they hadn't thought about these themes before. So the first step is awareness, right? The first step to any social change is awareness. So the first thing we have to do is help people understand, as you said at the very beginning, that this is a grey area and that people don't really always know what the skill set is. Once you've got that awareness in place, the second step is intention. Now, whether that's corporate, so that comes into things like culture, values, KPIs, what you measure against, expectations, HR's systems, processes, right? Intentional in the workplace or in your own life, it isn't about an intentional shift in your life. So, for example, those can be, I would call them micro-influencers, but things like using people's names, right? Making eye contact, saying thank you. There's hundreds of them, right? Ways to connect with others. In fact, my newest book is called 40 Ways to Connect with People. Nice. And that is what that book will be about, is 40 ways to intentionally create connection in life, in small ways and in big ways. And then the third part of that is accountability or measurement. So accountability would be in your personal life. You might say measurement in the workplace. But fundamentally, some form of accountability to keep up these behaviors. Because behavior is a pattern. It's not, I can't just be empathetic at 9 a.m. and not at 10 a.m., right? You have to sustain it, whether we're talking about culture or we're talking about our relationships. And of course we fall down. We can't be perfect, but then we should never aim for perfection. I always believe we should aim for progress, because we can't be perfect in these things. You know, you're not going to listen to the show and suddenly be perfectly empathetic with your husband or your children. But the gap between expectation and reality is disappointment. So if you don't want to be disappointed, focus on progress and not perfection, and holding yourself accountable to those things. I think that's the only way to create change, is one day and one action at a time. Yeah.
I say that to my kids all the time. I'm always like, practice makes progress. Practice makes progress. That's like their little saying that they say all the time. I'm wondering, in terms of the women that may be listening that may just be so exhausted from this grey area, this empathy that they feel like is just draining because it's kind of them giving of themselves constantly. I wonder, in terms of, are there any practical ways that she could probably use in terms of practicing empathy, but with healthy boundaries? So this is more in life than it is in the workplace. But I do think, like you said at the beginning, there's a majority of women who think empathy is compassion and, selflessness and all of these things wrapped into one. Yeah. And so for any woman that is in that place, what is a sort of healthy boundary that she can sort of practice?
So I think often where we get to that exhausted state, as you touched on, is because we give ourselves endlessly. So let's just quickly clarify again what we're talking about here, and then I'll give you the tips. But so empathy is the ability to understand, fundamentally to take your perspective. That's it. There's no feeling in there. It's very cognitive. I understand your perspective. Sympathy is to feel pity. It's a feeling. I feel sorry for you. I feel sad for you. It's a very well-intentioned emotion, but it's not very helpful when we're talking about boundaries and protecting yourself. Compassion is an action. So now that I have had empathy for you, in compassion, I might donate some money to a flood or whatever's happened, right? So I think it helps for all women to, first of all, understand, what are you using in this moment? What is draining you? And I'm going to make a bet, Jess, that 99% of the time, it's either sympathy or compassion. It's very rarely empathy. So that's quite liberating, because you realize this is actually a superpower, right? It's a skill to be able to understand those around me so that I can build better relationships, so that I can have better boundaries, so that I can be confident in saying things like, Jess, you're my best friend. I really want to be here for you today, and I want to hear all about what happened with your boyfriend. But quite honestly, I am so tired tonight. I'm going to be a really poor listener. Can you give me a day and let's have coffee this time tomorrow? Right? It's very unlikely that you're going to say absolutely not, right? Probably in empathy, you're going to say, yeah, sure, are you free at 3? Right? The ability to use your own communication skills to protect that exhaustion and that burnout. You cannot burn out from empathy, because it's a skill set. And what the data shows us is that the higher our empathy is, the higher our resilience is. The opposite is true with sympathy, right? So sympathy, you can burn out of. You will probably have heard things like sympathetic fatigue, right? If I feel sorry for everybody all the time, yes, I'm going to be exhausted. It's why I don't personally watch the news, because I would never get out of bed, and I certainly wouldn't do this work, right? So the definitions are important. Your language is important. And then standing up for what you need whilst being empathetic is a superpower, right? Being able to understand their context and then offer your needs and opinions within that is a form of both self-empathy and empathy. But the self-empathy itself will take you a really long way.
Yeah, when you said that, I was thinking, would you recommend then that self-empathy always comes first?
It's a really difficult question, Jess, because I went for many years thinking that the answer was yes. However, I'm now not so sure, because I think we are social beings at its core. And I talk a lot at the moment on stage about the self-help paradox of our times. And what I'm talking about is the fact that for 50 or 60 years now, since kind of self-help has been in bloom, we have been investing in ourselves to understand ourselves. It's been about me and understanding me and my needs and all of my me, right? But we have been doing that in an absence of the we. And today we spend $10.9 billion a year on self-help. Yes. And yet we are the loneliest, most isolated, most mental health worn generation in history. So where's all this self-help been going? Right? The longer we focus just on me and what my goals and my needs are, the longer we're isolating ourselves from the we. And as social beings, we need the we, right? To survive, we need each other. So our longevity is quite directly connected to our connection to each other. So we do always talk about put your own oxygen mask on first. And there is very rational reason for that. If I can't breathe, I can't save you, right? However, in recent months and over the period of this year, I have been really questioning which comes first. I don't have the answer, but I think without the we, without the us, there is no me. So it's a bigger question, probably. But I think they go hand in hand.
Is it fair to say that sustainable empathy would be on a case-by-case basis?
No, I think I think empathy is sustained through choice and intention and practice. Because I never run out of empathy, and I use it 24 hours a day, you know. But empathy will be impacted by things like health, physical health, if you're sick, if you're hot, if you're cold, if you're hungry, if you're tired, right? Like as mums will know, right? When you're very tired after work and your kids come, mommy, 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 right? No, 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 no. You're like, what? What do you want? Right? I'm trying to cook dinner. Well, what they want is acknowledgement, right? They've missed you all day. That's a different discussion. But the point I'm making is very hard for you to empathize with them when you're completely exhausted and starving hungry, right? So sustainable empathy comes back to choices and comes back to you knowing you and us being in a position that we're able to use that part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, to listen and to be curious with others.
If there was one thing that you want women to take away from this discussion, one key thing that you want them to hold and let it impact them in the coming days, what would it be?
I think I would go back to the point around you don't need to be powerful to hold power. I think everybody has great power to change and influence and impact those around you positively. Or perhaps yourself, if that's your goal. But you don't need to copy everybody else to do it. Don't try and be somebody else's version of your story. And I think that's particularly poignant in cities like Dubai, where I perceive that everybody's trying to do it like the other person, right? But I don't think that's the answer. I think the answers are within. And I think that if you just try and be you like you want to be, you will find that power. You don't need to borrow it or style it on somebody else.
I love that.
Good.
I was literally visualizing as you're speaking. I'm like, okay, so I want to do a quick fire round as we bring it to a close.
I'm ready.
So first things that come to your mind when I say these things, and let me know what you think. So
okay. So I just need to reply.
You just need to reply with the first answer that comes to you.
Okay.
As authentic as possible, which is perfect for you.
Got it.
A truth about womanhood that no one told you.
That motherhood hurts. And I don't mean having babies. I mean, like, it's quite painful to be a mum. Like, you get kicked, you drop things, they get heavy, right? Like, I feel like, yes, I feel like motherhood hurts quite a lot. I mean, I love being a mum, but nobody told me that. No. I was not prepared for that.
Yeah, no,
and that you don't sleep for like 6 years, not 6 months.
Yes.
Mums, new mums.
That part.
They don't sleep for like 6 years.
Yeah.
Nobody told me that.
Because your daughter's 8, my kids are 7 and 8, and I've only just got my sleep. I'm back to being a normal person.
Yes. In like half a decade. Why does nobody tell mums that? Probably because then you won't do it.
Exactly. And I figured that out. I was like, they don't tell us because they know we won't do it. Okay, next one. A moment you realized you had abandoned yourself.
I had abandoned myself, I think, in the job that I took here in 2018 because I took it for the wrong reasons. And then it took me 4 years to find myself again.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. It was tough, actually.
We need to get into that story one day.
Yeah, one day.
Yeah.
That's a long one.
That's a long one. Should have done the whole episode on that. Okay. A woman that deeply shaped your experience and who you are today.
Well, I'm not a woman, but I would say my daughter. Of course, she's only 7 years old. But she really does shape me. And, you know, Jess, I reflect often on how many women find motherhood very hard, and I understand why, because it is very hard. But I really, really enjoy being a mum. And when I spend time with my daughter, I become better because of her all the time. She's so wise. She's so
she was saying frustrated at 2 years old. I'm sure
she's so wise. You know, she says to me the other day, where are you going next? Because I travel a lot. I said, next I'm going to Dubai, but it's my last trip of the year, babe. Right, that's the last one. She looks at me and she says, are they paying you a lot? And I said, they're paying me fine. She said, because if it's an expensive trip, you can go. But if they're not paying you much, I think you should stay home. I'm like, yeah, you're probably right. So being her mum shapes who I am, I think. Probably more than any other female in my life, I think.
Fair.
So yeah, all power to her.
Yeah, I love that. I was open to having girls and I only had boys.
Did you get boys?
I've got 2 boys.
different experience.
Yeah,
Very different,
boy
like
mum,
girls and boys.
completely different experience.
Yeah, very different.
So it definitely makes me a better woman, but I'm more focused on making them really rounded, connected men.
Yes.
That will not grow up to be some other woman's problem. So that part. Okay, one boundary that you no longer negotiate.
Sleep. Yes. Well, we just spoke about it. That's probably why. But yes, even outside of motherhood, it's very important to me that I sleep at least 7 hours a night. I don't always achieve it, especially with my travel, but I think it's very, very important. And again, when you go back to who we are, I do a lot of work around evolution. We sleep for a reason, right? And there's so much data now that shows that if we don't sleep, it impacts things like Alzheimer's and inflammatory diseases, cancers, all kinds of stuff. So I really try to make sure that I can sleep.
I love that for you. And finally, you're on a journey of becoming.
Yes.
You've been on a journey of becoming for some time, and I'm sure you have your mindset on where you're going with it. When I say becoming her means, how would you define that? Becoming that version of yourself that you're on your way to becoming?
I think becoming her, becoming the version of me that I want to be in the future means being in flow all the time. And I'm getting closer to it. So this journey is really about 6 years old. And only now, right now, like now, like in the last 2 months, do I feel that real flow state that I never knew existed is becoming me, right? Is becoming me. So I think that even though, many people would look at my social media and say, you're very far along on this journey, I think this is actually year one. And I think 2026 is that year one. So becoming me, becoming her, becoming who I want to be will be about really leaning into that flow state and then living in it. And a huge amount of that comes from confidence, self-confidence, which is not my strong point, because it's hard. It's hard to do this work. It's hard to always believe that you can do it. And I think I don't really like the term imposter syndrome because I think it's a bit of a cop-out, but it exists, right? This constant questioning. I'm losing my voice. You can tell how hard I'm working, right? This constant questioning of, should it be me? Am I the right woman for the job? Am I doing it right? Am I doing enough? Those things start to fade the stronger the flow becomes because you're in it.
Yeah.
So I feel that flow. And as I said, I think next year's year one. And I hope it continues to flow.
Oh, I love that. I'm going to be following so closely your journey and everything that unfolds. Massive supporter. Thank you so much for taking the time to be on the pod today. Empathy is powerful, but it was never meant to cost us our peace. It wasn't meant to cost us our identity or our emotional freedom. So if there's one thing you take away from today's conversation, let it be this. Empathy is a gift, but only when it includes you. Self-empathy is a huge part of this. So thank you for listening, and thank you, Mimi, for reminding us that compassion and boundaries can coexist beautifully. Thank you for watching. See you next time.